Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our belated, off-schedule, weirdly scheduled class this Friday. Let's start as we usually do by giving tzedakah, giving charity. If you have a box like this at home, take a coin, put it in. If you don't have one, reach out. We'll get you one. Just put a coin in the box. Okay. If you'd like to sponsor this week's class or another class coming up in sometime in the future, please reach out to me at rabbi@jewisherie.com or 814-315-1344. Let's get into this. This is going to be a fascinating class. It's going to be very focused on Jewish law and Kabbalah, mysticism. Mainly the topic of today's class is prayer. How does Judaism look at prayer? So, 70 years without praying? That's the little title here. What should a person who lacks nothing pray for? An exploration of the 4 rungs of the prayer ladder. We'll get to that soon. So much of Judaism revolves around prayer and the synagogue. But what does it mean to pray? Is it a biblical commandment or an enactment, an institution of the sages? Is it possible to be exempt from prayer? What is prayer exactly? So we're going to get a glimpse into the essence of prayer from biblical times through the lens of Jewish law and Hasidic thought. Okay, starting with section A. If you have the booklet, it's on page 3. The obligation to pray. So you might be familiar with the Shema prayer. Shema. The Shema is probably the most famous and the most, let's call it important, prayer that there is in Judaism. Every Jew knows it, more or less, and the children, little kids, this is one of the first things they're taught, and when people pass away, that's what they have on their lips most of the time. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel. I don't know where the O came from, but hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. It's for professing God's unity and how it relates to us. But the Shema doesn't end there. There's another 3 paragraphs. So the first of those paragraphs, which is Shema and Ve'ahavta, were in last week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is the second paragraph. V'haya im Shemoah. But there's a word in here that's going to be the focus of today's class. So source 1, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 13 through 15. Now, if you will diligently obey my commandments that I command you this day, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, I will give the rain of your land. I'll give the rain of your land at its time, the early rain and the late rain, and you will gather your grain, your wine, and your oil. I will give you grass in your fields for your livestock, and you will eat and be satisfied. Sated. So the Torah commands us, if you notice toward the beginning, it says, Ule'avdo b'chol levavchem, you shall serve him, to serve him with all your heart. Sometimes the Torah can sound very vague. Like here, serve God. What do I do? What do I do? I would have had just as much information if it would have said, if you'll diligently obey my commandments and I command you this day to love the Lord your God and to do what he says. Okay, what does he say to do? It's a very vague statement. What does serving God mean? Comes along the Talmud. The Talmud, the oral tradition in a book form, comes and explains it to us. This is source 2, Talmud, the tractate Ta'anit, page 2, side A. It was taught, love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart. What is the service of the heart, asked the sages? They taught this is prayer. When the verse says to serve God with all your heart, it is referring to a very specific action, what we call prayer. As we will soon see, though, Maimonides, who we actually discuss quite a bit in these classes, known as the Rambam, is the only one, basically, who understands that these verses are referring to a biblical obligation to pray to God. But before we even get there, let's look into the Tanakh, into the Torah, to see some examples of people praying and learning from them what the service of the heart, what does prayer look like? So it's just a few examples. Prayer in biblical times. Source 3 is Genesis chapter 25. We have our patriarch and matriarch, Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah get married, and they are childless for 10 years. And they're very distraught about it. They really want children. So the Torah describes to us that they prayed to God, and they were blessed with a child. Actually, they were blessed with 2 children. Jacob and Esau. One was good, the other one was... Anyway. So let's see it inside. Source 3. Isaac prayed to God opposite his wife because she was barren. God accepted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. Source 4. This is another example. Speaking of these 2 guys, Jacob and Esau. So at a certain point in the story, Jacob does something which he took the birthright. He bought the birthright from Esau, his technically older brother, even though they were twins. And Esau later on got really upset about it, and to the extent that he wanted to actually kill his brother. So Jacob runs away, and he spends a number of years. He gets married, and he works for his father-in-law, who's a thief and a swindler. And after a number of years, he leaves, and he decides, you know what? I think it's about time that Esau he might have gotten over it. He might have forgiven me. So he sends a couple messengers to Esau to, make peace. So the messengers come back, and they say, dear Jacob. So Esau, you asked him to make peace. How do we say this? Not only does he not want to make peace, he's actually coming with 400 men to attack you. That was his response. So Jacob responds in a number of ways. First of all, he prepares for war. One of the things he does is he prays, as we'll see right now. Source 4. Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your land and to your birthplace, and I will do good to you. Here's the prayer. Deliver me now from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him, lest he come and strike me and strike a mother with her children. That's example number 2. Last example. This is from Samuel, book 1 of Samuel. There was a woman, her name was Hannah, or Hannah in English, wife of a man named Elkanah, who was childless for many years, much like Rebekah. And she came to the temple to pour out her heart before God, to ask for children. And she vowed that if God were to give her a child, she will dedicate his life to serving God in the Holy Temple. And that's exactly what happened. Let's see it inside. Hannah arose after eating and after drinking. And Eli, the priest, the high priest, was sitting on the chair beside the door of the temple of God. She was bitter in spirit, and she prayed to God and wept. And she vowed a vow and said, Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the affliction of your servant, and you will remember me, and not forget your servant, and give your servant a son, I will give him to God for all the days of his life. In fact, the story of Hannah is where we learn many of the important laws and details of prayer from the story of Hannah. So these examples from the patriarchs through the prophets demonstrate that prayer at its core is what? What is prayer? I need something. God, please give it to me. I'm lacking something. I need something in my life. It's not there. Please help me. That's essentially what it is. Prayer at its core is requesting for your needs. That's what we need to start off with on the right foot. That is prayer in a nutshell. Let's see how prayer plays out. No, prayer plays out in Jewish law. Let's go from the history to Jewish law and examine the practical obligation to pray. Yes, obligation, as we'll see in a minute. Source 6, Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, Laws of Prayer, Chapter 1, Laws 1 through 2. We're on page 4. It is a positive commandment to pray daily, says Maimonides. As it is written, you shall serve your God. Oral tradition teaches that this service means prayer, as it is written, and serve him with all your heart. The sages taught, what is the service of the heart? This is prayer. The obligation of this mitzvah is as follows. One must beseech and pray each day. First, one must speak God's praises, then request and beseech for their needs, then thank God and express gratitude for all the good that he grants to each person according to their needs. A few points, we're on the same page. positive commandment. That doesn't mean a happy commandment, and a negative commandment doesn't mean a sad commandment. Positive commandment means it's a mitzvah aseh. That's the Hebrew words. It's a positive commandment means do this. There's an active involvement, whereas a negative commandment is the opposite. It's don't do that. Okay. So from this statement of Maimonides, this is a law in his book of Jewish law, Mishnah Torah. It's very simple. He learns from this verse, you shall serve him with all your heart, that there's a biblical obligation to pray to God, which is interesting because usually people associate prayer with, if I need something, like we just said, if I need something, I'll turn to God and ask. An obligation to pray? Never heard of such a thing. But guess what? In Judaism, it's an obligation to pray. It's an obligation to pray. All we saw from the Torah, from the three examples that we gave, is that when somebody is distressed, somebody has a need, they turn to God to pray. It's a good thing to do. But Maimonides comes and innovates for us this idea that the Torah is actually telling us there's an obligation to pray. But being that we see in other places that it just seems like a good idea, where did the Maimonides get this idea that it's an obligation? Meaning, Maimonides is very singular about this. He's one of the only opinions that says this, as we'll see momentarily, right now. Nachmanides, Ramban, he's known as, Maimonides is known as Rambam, and Nachmanides is known as Ramban. They're two different people. The Maimonides, he had written a book called Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Mitzvahs, where he gets together all 613 mitzvahs of the Torah and puts them into a clear structure. Now, there's many commentaries on this book. One of them is from Nachmanides. So Nachmanides on the Sefer HaMitzvot, regarding positive mitzvah number 5, very directly disagrees with Maimonides. He says, straight up, this is incorrect. Prayer is certainly not an obligation. Rather, it is an expression of God's kindness that he hears our prayers and answers our call. Nachmanides disagrees vehemently with Maimonides and says that prayer is not a biblical obligation. No such thing. We have a biblical obligation to keep Shabbos. We have a biblical obligation to eat kosher food. We have a biblical obligation to keep the laws of family purity. Says Nachmanides, we do not have a biblical obligation to pray. All the Torah tells us is that when someone faces a great need, it's a great idea. There's some to pray and know that there's somebody listening and to answer our call. We can choose whether to pray or not. Says Nachmanides that the sages later came along and instituted an obligation to pray. So it's not a biblical obligation, it's a rabbinical obligation, according to Nachmanides. Okay, page 5 in your booklet, the Rebbe. The Rebbe is going to analyze this, because Maimonides, actually, his opinion seems very perplexing, which is why Nachmanides disagrees with him. So let's see it inside. Maimonides writes in the Laws of Prayer that it is a positive biblical mitzvah to pray every day, as we had just read. This statement has been questioned on 2 points. A, there are a number of passages in the Talmud that indicate that the obligation to pray is of rabbinic origin. So not just our understanding of the 5 books of Moses, but also in Talmud, it seems pretty apparent that there's no biblical obligation to pray. It's something that the sages instituted. And B, even if the obligation is biblical, what is Maimonides' source that it is a daily obligation? These questions have been discussed at length. The commentators explain that Maimonides' statement that prayer is a biblical mitzvah is referring to when people feel they are lacking something. At such a time, there is a mitzvah to request one's needs. Regarding Maimonides' stipulation that prayer must be performed daily, the commentators explain that it doesn't make sense for this mitzvah to only be observed once in a while, so it must be that the obligation is daily. But the above notwithstanding, Maimonides' ruling still isn't fully clear. So according to Maimonides, there's a biblical obligation to pray. The question is when. So our question is, how does he know this? But also, when? How often? Whenever I have a need? What if that's every 10 years? A Jew should pray every 10 years? It sounds very strange. So that being the case, the commentators explain the logic behind it, that to pray once in a while is illogical. Once in a while for me could be every 3 minutes, and once in a while for some other guy could be every 45 years. So the sages, not the sages, according to Maimonides, he learns from this logic that the Torah actually obligates a person to pray on a consistent basis every day. The details behind that and the exact nuances, we're not going to get into right now. But let's see in the Kesef Mishnah, source 8. Kesef Mishnah is a commentary on Maimonides' Mishnah Torah. We're about to read is his comment on this law of Maimonides about praying every day biblically. The Kesef Mishnah is the name of the commentary, but the commentator, the author of said commentary, his name was Rabbi Yosef Cairo. He authored the original Code of Jewish Law about, I'm going to get my dates off, 500-600 years ago. And the Jewish world follows Jewish law. We follow Jewish practice according to this book. It's called the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. Shulchan Aruch does not translate it to Code of Jewish Law, but I'm just practically saying Code of Jewish Law. So he also wrote a commentary on Maimonides. So let's see. This is what he says. Maimonides' opinion is that there is a positive biblical command to pray daily. Based on the verse, you shall serve God, and this service is daily. If it wasn't daily, this is the logic. If it wasn't daily, perhaps it's once in a lifetime. That is irrational. The obligation is certainly daily, but the amount of daily prayers is not specified, and biblically, once a day suffices. As the Rebbe is about to note, this is not sufficiently clear. Page 6 in your booklet. Complete agreement. Okay, so we're about to learn we're seeing now that there's a difference of opinion in the codifiers of Jewish law, the early codifiers, is whether prayer is a biblical obligation or a rabbinical obligation. Most opinions, including Nachmanides, agree or hold that it is a rabbinical obligation. The Torah does not require us to pray, especially on a daily basis, but rabbinically, the sages came along and instituted the obligation to pray daily. And Maimonides on the other end of the spectrum, and he holds that prayer is a biblical obligation, and the biblical obligation applies daily. However, the Rebbe is about to point out that there is one form of prayer that across the board, everybody agrees contains a biblical obligation, which is, there is one form of prayer that all authorities agree is counted as a biblical positive mitzvah, which is to call out to God and blow trumpets during a time of war. We'll explain this in a second. As the verse states, when you go into battle in your land against an enemy who is oppressing you, sound a teruah blast on the trumpets. Teruah is the type of sound on Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up. We have such a similar sound with the shofar. So praying to God at a time of war is clearly a biblical obligation because it is stated explicitly in the verse. So let's see the way Maimonides words the law, and let's see it in its source in the book of Numbers. So Maimonides defines this mitzvah in source 9. There is a biblical obligation to cry out and blow trumpets for any calamity. So Maimonides actually brought us this. It's not just war, it's any calamity, any tragedy or state of distress. For any calamity that befalls the people, as the verse states, against an enemy who is oppressing you, sound a teruah blast on the trumpets. This means to say that you shall cry out and blow trumpets over anything that oppresses you, whether famine, pestilence, a plague of locusts, etc. So let's see the source for this inside. In source 10. God spoke to Moses, saying, make yourself 2 silver trumpets of a solid piece of silver. You should use them to summon the people and to announce the departure of the camps. When they are sounded, the entire people should assemble to you at the entrance of the tent of meeting. If one of them is sounded, the princes, the leaders of Israel's thousands, shall convene to you. When a teruah blast is sounded, the camps which are encamped to the east shall travel. When a second teruah blast, on page 7 now, when a second teruah blast is sounded, the camps encamped to the south shall travel. A teruah shall be sounded for traveling, but when assembling the congregation, you shall sound a tekiah blast, different type of sound, not a teruah. The descendants of Aaron, the priests, shall sound the trumpets. This shall be an eternal statute for your generations. Now here's the main part. When you go into battle in your land against an enemy who is oppressing you, sound a teruah blast on the trumpets. By this you will be remembered before God and be saved from your enemies. So God commands Moses to craft 2 silver trumpets, not for music, but for a different purpose, actually for multiple different purposes. Sounding one way will congregate the entire Jewish people. Sounding another way will the different camps that the Jewish camp was made of should start traveling. And another purpose was to cry out to God in a time of distress, in a time of war. Okay. We're putting that aside. This is an idea that was just brought up in the class. Put it aside. There's an idea that everybody agrees on. There's a form of prayer that has a biblical status of an obligation to pray. When there's a distress, a calamity, some sort of danger, some sort of attack. Put it aside, compartmentalize it on the shelf, as I had a teacher who used to say. He probably still says it. And we'll get back to it. Here's the Rebbe's question. A lifetime without biblical prayer. There's a big problem with this. According to Maimonides, there's no problem. But according to all the other guys, we have an issue. What's the issue? Based on the above explanation of the halachic means Jewish law-ic. There's no way to say that in English. Based on the above explanation of the halachic definition of prayer, people that feel they lack nothing and have no wars, etc., have never prayed on the biblical level for their entire lives. Even if they pray all day long, this is only considered on a rabbinic level. There's a big problem. Imagine a person that lacks nothing. May there be many such people in our lives, including ourselves. I'm sure it's a rarity, but I'm sure there are people that lack nothing, or they feel they lack nothing. Either they have everything they need, they have all the money they need, they have all the food they need, they have all the wealth, the health they need, they have all the family, the relationships, everything they could possibly need, they have. Or they don't have as much as, the wealthiest guy in the world, but they don't feel they need that much. So in their hearts and their minds, they have everything they need. The point is, a person who feels like they lack nothing, they have everything, has a rabbinical obligation to pray. Even according to Maimonides, according to these opinions, one who has everything, or they feel they lack nothing, never, ever, ever has prayed a prayer on a biblical level. They had never had a biblical obligation to pray because they never lacked anything. So they're going to miss out on such a special opportunity because they lack nothing. It's funny because somebody who's lacking nothing, they said they're doing great, but they also, because they're lacking nothing, they lack this. They lack the biblical obligation to pray. They're missing out. So what's going on over here? Any questions? Later. Okay. Section B, a true need. Says the Rebbe, page 8. This is a topic where the need for the teachings of Hasidus is clear because it transforms one's prayers into a biblical mitzvah. When you delve into the teachings of Hasidus, the inner aspect, the soul of Torah, not just the legal aspect of Torah, it brings one to a realization that they are lacking, even if they have everything. And by realizing that they are lacking, that they are missing something, now they feel they have a need, and they're going to pray based on that need, and now they are praying on a biblical level. In other words, Hasidus helps bring a person to pray on a biblical level, every person, regardless of where they're holding. Material lowliness. When we contemplate God's greatness, we realize how lowly our human existence is, how limited and constrained we are. When we are lacking some food, it affects our minds. When we're missing sleep, we can't focus. And our entire existence is dependent on forms of life inferior to us, animals, plants, and inanimate objects. In Torah, the physical world is split up into four main categories. Inanimate objects, rocks, minerals, water, even though water flows, but water doesn't move on its own. There's no life to water. Step up is things that possess some sort of energy, some sort of life. Plants, trees, vegetation, fruits, vegetables, things like that. Next stage up is things that not only have life, but they have a mind, they have a brain. Like animals. Animals is the third category. And the fourth category is a creature that not only has life, it has a brain, but also has a rational mind, and it can make choices and can think and can articulate words. Human being. And they're in a list. There's 4 different levels, one higher than the next. A human being is a very limited creature. We have our limitations. You can't stay up for 9 days straight. It just doesn't work. How busy you are or how much fun you're having, you can't stay up for 9 days straight. You will crash. You will eventually fall asleep automatically against your will. Also, food. A person who doesn't eat for a certain amount of time is very dangerous. We need food. We need to come to something that is lower than us in order to live. We're very, very dependent beings. So that's material lowliness. So somebody who is dependent on these things, even if they're dependent, if they have all the food that they need to eat, they have all the health that they need, and they have all the money they need, and all the other things, they're not lacking. What about spiritual lowliness? The same is true about our spiritual states. When we consider the greatness of God and how our soul has fallen from great heights to great depths, we realize how pathetic our state is. This is especially true when we make an honest appraisal of ourselves. Which of our 2 inclinations is in control, the positive or the negative? We are unable to reach the goal of, quote, you should exit this world as clean as you entered it. Think about it. Even if you're a good person, okay? I'm sure everybody here is good people. Even if you're a good person, the way you currently are was not anything near what you used to be. What does that mean? Before a baby is born, their soul's in heaven. Call it heaven. Gan Eden in Hebrew. What is the soul doing there? It's enjoying the most intense, incomprehensible form of spiritual bliss and enjoyment. We can't wrap our minds around it. It just doesn't. We're too. That's the problem. We're too physical, as we'll see in a second. This soul is sent on an incredible mission. Please go down to a physical world. You're going to go into a physical body. And you'll have a mission. Learn Torah, do mitzvahs, be a good Jew. Try your best. Soul says, I'm ready. Let's do it. Oh, 1 second. You're going to a physical body. Okay, and therefore what? Well, physical body has physical needs. It needs to eat. It needs to sleep. Okay, that's a little weird. I don't know why you'd need to eat or sleep, says the soul. Sounds a little ridiculous. Like, why not just connect to God all day long? So the soul is told, exactly. You're going to go through this body and you're going to have these needs, but also you might get a little lost. You might get a little obsessed with these needs. Obsessed with these needs? What do you mean? You might oversleep because it feels so good. You might, be so into your food that you run after it. And, you're going to take a bite into your pizza and you're going to pull the pizza away from your teeth, and the cheese has to stretch a certain amount of length. And if it doesn't stretch long enough, the pizza's not good enough. And the soul's like, what are you talking about? Why would I enjoy that? Trust me. And the soul's put into such a body, and not just that, but it's also given another a little bug onto it, a negative tendency to do things that are wrong. We all have this. To be self-obsessed to the extent that it harms others or goes contrary to what God wants of us. And the soul's very confused by this, but the soul goes and gives up and literally sacrifices itself to go into this mission. And it comes to a body, and all these things happen. We lose sight of what our true mission is. And the soul's suffering, it's struggling. It can't express itself. It's trying to express itself, and it's not working. To compare the state, the way the soul used to be before it was born into a body, to the way it currently is, when you think about that, and when you learn about it, and then you have what to think about, and you meditate on that, it makes one feel very, very down. Not sad, not depressed, but I'm missing something. This is not what life is supposed to be about. Or the way the sages worded that your exit from this world should be as clean as you entered it. A lot of us, can we look at ourselves and say that? Can we say, am I as clean and pure, as holy and holy as I was when I entered this world? Continuing on page 9, says the Rebbe, when we feel our sorry state, we feel a great need. In the words of the second In the words of the second Chabad Rebbe, in the back of the room over there's yarmulkes on the little like shelf thing. And when you come back, there's turnovers on the corner over there. Okay. Yeah. When we feel our starry state, we feel a great need. In the words of the second Chabad Rebbe, when the poor person is reminded of his impoverished state, he immediately bursts into bitter tears. So after such a meditation, we are sure to feel a great need. Like a poor person who's moved to cry bitterly because of his impoverished state, so to a person who realizes how fragile and unstable he is, both materially and spiritually, is moved to feel a great need and want for improvements. Since this feeling of lowliness and need is deep and personal, we become obligated to pray on the biblical level. And when we go ahead and pray, we fulfill the biblical mitzvah. So now that we feel that we are truly in need, our prayer is a biblical obligation. Just to catch you up, I'll say in short, there's a discussion about prayer. Okay, that there's an argument among the codifiers of Jewish law: is prayer a biblical obligation or is it a rabbinical institution? Most opinions say that it is something that the sages came along later and instituted. There's no obligation. The Torah doesn't obligate us to pray. We pray because it's an important thing to do, and God answers us. Thank God, hopefully. But we're not required to pray the Torah doesn't command us to pray. Maimonides is the only opinion, the great Maimonides, the great doctor and scholar. We're on page 9. He's the only opinion, more or less, that holds that prayer is a biblical obligation. We said that there is one form of prayer that all opinions agree is a biblical obligation, which is when Jewish people are under attack. Any sort of calamity, some sort of tragedy is happening, and you cry out to God for help, that everybody agrees has the status of a biblical prayer. But otherwise, only if one is lacking, they feel a need, then they are required to pray. The problem is, what if somebody who doesn't feel like they're lacking anything? Either they have everything they need, or they don't have everything they need. They don't have millions of dollars, they don't have tons of food, but they feel that they have everything they need. They're good, they're sufficient. Does that mean that every time they pray, they're just fulfilling a rabbinical commandment, but they're not fulfilling it on the biblical level? They're missing out. So we just finished saying was that the teachings of Chassidus, the soul of Torah, when one meditates on these teachings, it can bring one to feel a lack. When one feels like they're lacking, then they are now praying on a biblical level. And they're praying to God for those things, which is that when one understands and learns about and understands and meditates on what one used to be and compare that to where they are now. The person used to be a soul, a pure soul up in heaven, enjoying infinite, incomprehensible enjoyment and bliss, spiritual bliss, and has no distractions, totally focused. And you come down into a physical body, you have distractions, you have desires, you have negative urges, which sometimes we act out on, unfortunately, and we beat ourselves up afterwards that we did that. But the soul is pure and holy. It doesn't want to do these things. And when a person meditates on this idea that they used to be like this, and now they felt so far down spiritually, it brings them to a state of bitterness, and they feel like I'm lacking that connection. I want that connection again. And they turn to God and they pray, please let me get that again. Not God forbid the person should die and go back to heaven. That's not how it works. But the person, they want to feel that purity. They want to feel that cleanliness, that clean state. So says the Rebbe that when one prays based on this, they're praying now on a biblical level. That means that when somebody meditates on this, everybody has access to praying on a biblical level. Okay. Going back to the idea about calling out a time of war, that everybody agrees is a biblical mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, page 9, biblical prayer. This obligation also incorporates the biblical mitzvah to cry out to God and sound the trumpets at a time of war. What the Rebbe is about to say is that this idea that everybody agrees on, that when the Jewish people are under attack and they call out to God to help, that is prayer on a biblical level. Everybody agrees on that. Says the Rebbe, this idea that we're saying here about the soul's fall into a physical body and the distance between where it was and where it is now is kind of woven into this idea about being attacked, because there's being attacked on a physical level, and then the underlying idea is that being attacked on a spiritual level. For we are calling out to God and asking him to, quote, stand at the right hand of the needy, to save their lives from those who would rule them. referring to the internal battle described in the book of Tanya as two souls that battle each other for control of the body and its limbs. Our negative inclination, the foreign god in your midst, wages a war in your land, attempting to conquer all of our limbs and sinews, as well as our thought, speech, and action, the three garments of our soul. This needs some explanation. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, wrote a groundbreaking, tiny little book, but it's groundbreaking. It's literally life-changing. It's called the Tanya. Right in the beginning, the Alter Rebbe lays out a foundation, which is every single Jew possesses not one soul, they possess two souls. Yeah, we have this problem. One soul is a pure, holy soul. It's a piece of God, so to speak. And all it wants is a connection with God. It wants to learn Torah. It wants to do mitzvahs. It wants to be a good Jew. Our other part of ourselves, which is called the animalistic soul, not an animal soul. We don't have an animal soul inside us. That would be very strange. We have an animalistic soul. What does an animalistic soul mean? It's a human soul. It's a soul for a human being with animalistic tendencies. What are animalistic tendencies? What do animals do? What do they like to do? What do animals naturally do? They eat. They sleep. They do whatever feels good for it. That's what they do. Even if there's things that are noble, like they protect each other, and these are all important things, but they're all animalistic tendencies. A human being has the ability to strive for more than that. Not, God forbid, to ignore that. If a person doesn't eat and doesn't sleep, they don't take care of themselves, they don't take care of their family. That's not human. That's not even animalistic. That's just wrong. We have an animalistic soul that wants those things. It wants what's good for it. It wants to enjoy itself. It wants a really juicy slice of pizza. It wants that tasty burger. And it has to have just the right amount of lettuce, pickles, and tomatoes, and mustard. No ketchup. Right? And we have this dichotomy within us that is pulling us in two different directions. Oftentimes we feel strongly the side that wants what's good for me. But oftentimes, like Jewish guilt, people talk about Jewish guilt, it's coming from this other soul, the godly soul. So when a person feels that they are under attack, they feel that their negative inclination, their negative tendencies, animalistic soul is trying to take over the body. That's what these two souls struggle with. They want to each take over the body and rule it completely. When one feels that they are being attacked, that instead of wanting to do something pure and holy, I want to do something that's selfish, the person can feel like they're under attack. Like, I don't want this. This is not who I really am. I don't want to do these things. Whether it's something that's kosher, so to speak, but it's, again, coming from a selfish place. And much more so if it's not so kosher. Here's the thing, though. Sure, we might be engaged in a constant battle within ourselves. And therefore, we have a need, we have the biblical obligation to pray when we feel like we're under attack and we need help. But before we even go further, let's just continue on at the end of page 9. There's a quote from the Code of Jewish Law where this whole idea that we're talking about, that the mysticism of Torah teaches us, is actually reflected and hinted to in the regular parts of Torah, the legal part of Torah. Code of Jewish Law, source 11. After studying this Hasidic teaching, we find that this idea is already mentioned in the Code of Jewish Law. It says, before prayer, one should meditate on God's greatness and the lowliness of man. Now, I understand sort of to pray and before prayer to think about God's greatness, to inspire myself, I guess. But the lowliness of man, why? It's this idea. When I realize how low I've fallen, and where I'm holding in my life, and how much better I can be, I feel like I'm lacking. It creates a lack that was always there, but just realizing it. And then I start praying on a biblical level. Okay, but let's go back to that for a second. I feel like I'm under attack, right? Because I'm being attacked by desires that are foreign to me. 1 second. Okay, my soul fell from this high, beautiful place to this body, and I have my issues. Okay, I understand that. Should I feel bad for myself? I don't know. Maybe I don't care. Maybe I just simply don't care. Okay, I used to be there. Now I'm here. Okay, I'm honky-dory. I don't really care. Why should I care? So we'll see that in a minute. But before we go further, I'm just going to go quickly get a cup of water for myself. Water, anybody? Okay. Okay. Section C, page 10. The ladder of prayer. In order to reach this feeling of great need, so we can cry out to God from the depths of our hearts, there is a specific process we must follow. We're about to name off a list of things that are through the prayer service, that are printed in the prayer book, the Siddur, but they're written in Hebrew, so it's okay if you don't know what they mean. We must begin with the prayer of Matovu, which is toward the beginning, continue with Hodu, Pesukei de Zimra, and the Shema blessings. We must follow this order without skipping anything, despite the fact that there are halachic, again, halachic means Jewish law-ik, which is not a word, despite the fact that there are halachic grounds to skip various parts under circumstances, but there's a need to not skip. In order to reach this state that we described, feeling our spiritual needs as importantly, that it should be as important to us as our material needs, we need to follow the full process of prayer leading up to the Amidah, the main prayer. We have to follow this process. Why are all these preparatory stages required? Why can't we just go straight to the main part? The answer is hinted in a verse. There's a verse, Jacob, he is traveling, he stops somewhere, and he goes to sleep. And he has a dream. And in his dream, what does he see? It says, which means that he sees this giant ladder. The bottom is stuck in the ground, and the top is reaching all the way into the heavens. And he sees angels going up and down the ladder. That's the dream. And God talks to him in the dream as well, but that's the next part. On a deeper level, this ladder represents prayer, as we're about to see. This ladder represents prayer. Prayer is a ladder. Now, if you're trying to get to the top of the ladder, if you skip right to the top, you know what's going to happen? Nothing. You'll stay on the ground because you can't reach the top. You need to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, going up higher and higher. And it might be boring. It might be tedious. It might be slow. Why can't I just go straight to the top? Because you can't go straight to the top. It's just not possible. Same as with prayer. There's an order. There's there's stages. There's rungs. You can't go to the top and be at the most perfect, loftiest level, which we'll talk about soon in a minute, if you don't go through the first initial steps. So let's see. Prayer is a ladder. Source 12. This is from a book of Hasidic thought, of Hasidus from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, called Derech Mitzvosecha, page 177, side B. Prayer is called a ladder. Like a ladder is comprised of many rungs, which bring one higher and higher, prayer brings us from the world of action to the world of emanation. Give me a second. These are the 4 steps of prayer. 1, until Baruch Sha'amar, which is toward the beginning of the service, we rise from the world of action. 2, from there until Yotzer, we rise through the world of formation. 3, from Yotzer to the Amidah is the world of creation. 4, the Amidah is the world of emanation. Each of these worlds has several sub-levels as well. These are the various chapters of Psalms in Pesukei de Zimra and the multiple blessings before the Shema. I don't expect you to understand anything that was just read. It's okay. Kabbalah talks about 4 worlds. 4 worlds. We like to think there's one world. It's not true. There's more than one world. There's 4 worlds. Where are these worlds? Is it past Jupiter or before Jupiter? Jupiter planet? Is Jupiter's still a planet, right? What was the one that Pluto, right? It was those. No, yeah, Pluto, right? For Pluto. Okay. When we say worlds, we're not talking about planets. We're talking about a state of reality. Think about it like somebody. You both don't wear glasses. Contacts. Oh, okay. So maybe you understand. I don't know what your prescription is, but people who really can't see without glasses, they really can't see. When they are not wearing glasses, like myself, I can't see anything. Everything is all blurry. And imagine somebody's walking on like this their entire life. And then one day somebody says, here, put these on. I'm like, I don't want these. What do I do with these? Like, put them on your face. Like, okay. No, on your eyes. Okay. And he puts them on his eyes and he goes, what? His entire view of life just changed completely. He sees the world for what it really is. He didn't realize he was living in a mess. He was living in a blur. So a similar thing with these 4 worlds, which in Hebrew are called Asiya, which is the lowest world. The next world up is Yetzira, then Beriah, and followed by Atzilus. Or in English, we're calling them the world of action, the world of formation, the world of creation, the world of emanation. These are not worlds that you can go to. These are different higher states of reality, where godliness is more and more apparent and more real. The prayer service is orchestrated, is organized in such a way that we can back up. These four worlds, these four states of reality are actually reflected within our own soul. We're connected with these states. The problem is most of us don't have access. You know why? No, we don't have access because we can't access, but simply because we didn't put the glasses on yet. Prayer helps us put those glasses on. If you prayed properly. Praying properly is not an easy task, but it should be done. That doesn't mean that you're going to start experiencing deep levels of consciousness. It's nothing miraculous here. We're not talking about prophecy. When we go through the appropriate steps of prayer, as they're laid out in the Siddur, in the prayer book, we start to get a sense of these levels. So, step 1, gratitude and humility. Source 13, page 11. The morning prayers begin with offer praise to God, proclaim his name, which is a general acknowledgement. So the first step in prayer is the world of action. Gratitude and humility are a cornerstone for our entire day. It's the first rung of prayer. Before we can have a conversation with God, we need to realize before who we are standing. We need to get ourselves out of the way, in a sense, before attempting to delve into his greatness. Going further, source 14, we cannot comprehend it's the same idea. We cannot comprehend the magnitude of God's greatness and wisdom, but we can recognize that he is very wise, and we must express great gratitude and praise to him. This is the G, a G or a J in this word? Tell me. Analogous or analogous? Analogous, thank you. This is analogous to a pauper acknowledging the king's wealth, despite not having any comprehension of its value. The pauper acknowledges that even if he doesn't understand it, he must still be thankful for it and praise it. You can't progress unless you start with humility. That's just the way things work. For example, a kid is going to college, okay? Before they can step foot into a classroom, before they can hear what the professor has to say, they first need to realize and accept that the person at the front of the room knows more than I do. You have to. That's the step 1. Why? Because if a person walks in and says, I know everything, nobody can tell me otherwise, they will walk into college, they'll walk out 1, 2, 3, 4 many years later, and they will have learned nothing because they were not open to learning. They will never advance. The same applies when speaking to God. If one approaches God completely focused on themselves and not leaving room for God, they will not have a conversation with God. They will not be available. The first step is basic humility. Step 2, awe and love. So the second stage corresponds to the world of formation, or Yetzirah in Hebrew. In this stage, the wonders of creation are described in great detail, beginning with the meditation of what it says in the Siddur, blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being, in general terms, and continue with a more detailed description of the beauty of creation. If you look in the Siddur, you'll see after what's called Baruch Shamar, there's many paragraphs which go into the beauty that God puts into creation, into the world. This stage arouses our emotions to be visibly moved by the wonders of the universe and generates a feeling of love for the Creator. Source 15. How does one develop love and reverence for God? This is from Maimonides' Book of Jewish Law. He says, how do you do this? When one meditates on the wonders of God's awesome creation and sees how his wisdom is infinite and unparalleled, they will immediately love, praise, and glorify him and deeply want to know more about God. As King David says, my soul thirsts for the Lord, the living God. It's funny. You have 2 different types of scientists, biologists, doctors, whatever types of people you want to use. There are those who are believers, those who are not. And both of them exist. There are people who are scientists and philosophers, and they don't believe in a God, in a Hashem. And the more they study the world, the more they study the universe, the more it becomes clear to them that such a thing is not possible, that there is no God. Whereas a believer, there are many scientists who are religious Jews, by the way. And you hear them talk, and they share with you what inspires them most about what they study is that the more they study, the more they learn about the world, the more in awe they are of what the wisdom that God put into creation. Step 3, self-nullification, source 16, page 12. This is the idea behind meditating on the nullification of the angels before reciting the Shema. Stop. Open up the prayer book. We have some on the shelf in there. If you follow through the prayers, we get to the Shema. The Shema is, like we said earlier, is the most important, most famous, one of the most important prayers in the prayer book. And Jews just know this, the Shema. The problem is the Shema is preceded by two long blessings. And these blessings, if you read the blessings, you might get a little confused because you look at the blessings, you look at the Shema, you're like, what did these two things have to do with each other? What does the Shema talk about? The Shema talks about God's oneness. It talks about when you fulfill the commandments, then you will be blessed, and there's an obligation to love God and certain other mitzvahs over there. The blessings preceding the Shema talk about angels. Angels. The bulk of it talks about angels. Where did angels get lost? They end up in the prayer book just by accident. They were busy up in heaven, and they really like a place in that book. Let's go. Let's see what's going on here. This is why we talk about the nullification of the angels before reciting the Shema. Even the loftiest angels, the seraphim, who reside in the world of creation, are completely and existentially nullified because of their understanding of God's greatness. Contemplating the nullification of the angels causes even our animalistic soul to be nullified before godliness. This is analogous to a physical king and his relationship with his simple subjects. Even a simpleton, incapable of understanding the king's greatness and appreciating it, will still be moved by seeing the ministers bowing and nullifying themselves before the king, and will have a similar reaction. And this is what happens to our animal soul as well. Although it cannot comprehend godliness at all, through reflecting on the understanding and nullification of the angels, it too is nullified. And in addition, the root of the animalistic soul is actually from the angels. The animalistic soul, those desires, come from angels, believe it or not. The angels called ophanim. Therefore, when we understand how our root is nullified, that affects the same within us as well. Knowing that the angels are the root of the animal soul creates an even stronger nullification. So the way it's worded usually is when you walk into a room and you don't know what's going on, you don't know who the people in the room are, you walk in this big room and there's one person at the end of the room. And everyone in the room, imagine, is bowing down to this person. And they're completely subservient to this person. They submit themselves before this person. The natural reaction is going to cause us, like, there's something very important about this person, something very special about this person. You don't know who they are. You don't know anything about them. You don't know their backstory. You don't know what kind of food they like. Doesn't matter. You will still have a certain sense of awe just by seeing everybody else realizing who they're standing before. Step 4, face-to-face conversation. After expressing gratitude at the beginning of prayer, marveling at the wonders of creation, which arouse a love for God, and then examining the nullification of the angels, which implanted the same nullification within us. By the way, this is all in best case scenario. It takes a ton of work. We arrive at the Amidah prayer. This is the climax of the service, the highest rung of the ladder. I don't know the climax of the service, the apex, like the highest point. So you have to go back down afterwards. The highest rung of the ladder. Here we are at our closest point to God and speak with him face to face, so to speak. Source 17, page 13. After the preceding prayers comes the Amidah, where we stand like servants before our master, existential nullification. So after strolling through the palace, we stand at the king's chamber. We hold on to the door handle, we tremble with emotion. When we pray the Amidah, we start with a very funny statement. The first line at the beginning of the Amidah is, God, open my lips and allow my mouth to speak your praises. What happened the past 30 minutes? What were you doing? What were you doing with your mouth? You were speaking God's praises and you were doing just fine. All of a sudden, God, I need help. Open my mouth and help me articulate this. What happened? You were really doing fine till now. If you were praying properly, this sentence makes a lot of sense. You've gotten to this point, you have no words. You're stuck. There's nothing coming out. The sense of awe and absolute nothingness of I feel no self-importance. All I'm focused on is God. if we really felt that, we would have no words to say. So we started with a prayer. Please help me say words. But because we're standing before the king, we're completely nullified. Unlike the rest of the service, the Amidah is said quietly. We whisper for the same reason. There's no room for external displays of emotion. Okay, so now that we've learned about the ladder of prayer, let's continue with the Rebbe's address. The 4 rungs deepen the feeling of need. So going back to this idea of feeling a lack. The teachings of Chassidus guide us in how to meditate, beginning with the meditation on the beginning of the prayers, offer praise to God, proclaim his name, make his deeds known among the nations. Then comes the Pesuke de Zimra, in which we meditate on, quote, he shall raise the glory of his people, end quote, unquote, whatever the word is, for his name alone is exalted, his splendor is on the earth and the heavens. We then reach the blessings of Shema, in which we talk about the angels, the Seraphim, the Chayot, and the Ofane HaKodesh, who constantly bless God and proclaim his sanctity. We contemplate the fact that our animalistic soul contains elements from these angels, yet we completely lack their angelic passion for God and only feel our relationship to the material world. This causes us to cry bitterly, feeling the great desire and thirst, standing as we do in a dry and parched land where there is no water. With this feeling, we turn to God and pray that he satiate our thirst and hunger because we can't take it any longer. So in short, when you learn the teachings of Chassidus and you meditate on them properly, it will, and you pray with those meditations, it will actually bring up every person to a state of feeling a lack of a thirst, and only God can quench that thirst. And therefore, you're praying. I'm getting the words wrong on a biblical level. Vital needs, page 14. An example of this can be found in the note sent by the Chassid Rabbi Isaac of Homel, known as Isaac Homler, to the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, asking him to answer his question because it was a vital need for him. We'll read the note right now, actually. Actually, it doesn't say the note here, but it's talking about him. Source 18. Rabbi Isaac of Homel was a close student of the Alter Rebbe. He was an exceptional scholar in the revealed and hidden parts of Torah, and his thirst for studying Hasidic teachings was so great that it affected his very life. His teachers encouraged that thirst. He would visit them often, writing requests that they reveal more to him because it affects his life. When he succeeded, he could not be more elated. He delved into the depths of Hasidism and authored valuable books on it. So like Rabbi Isaac of Homel, who wrote to the Alter Rebbe asking him to teach him more because it affects his life, so too every Jew can, after meditating on the rungs of prayer, understand their great spiritual lack and feel as though it affects their very life. Last little paragraph, and I'm going to end off with a story which kind of accentuates everything we learned here. It's a fascinating story. It's one of my favorite stories. I might have even shared it once here or at my dining room table. I don't know. End off with the Rebbe's words on page 15, a thrice daily biblical mitzvah. This is relevant for every Jew, even the most simple person, and even in the era of exile. The men of the Great Assembly standardized the prayers in a form that works for all of us. Through meditating on all the stages of prayer, from Matohu until the Amidah, as explained in Chassidus, we can reach a true feeling of all-encompassing need. And then when we pray to God, we are fulfilling a biblical mitzvah 3 times a day. By contrast, a person who doesn't study Chassidus can go through a life of 70 years without ever having tasted true prayer. We'll stop for questions in just a couple minutes when I finish the story. We'll end up with the story. By the way, class is usually shorter than this. This particular class was longer. The letter that was never delivered. Some 300 years ago, there lived an affluent man named Avigdor. He once brought a large sum of money to Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, to be distributed to the poor on his behalf. Accepting the contribution graciously, the Baal Shem Tov, which literally means the master of a good name, inquired if perhaps Avigdor would like a blessing in return. After all, the Baal Shem Tov was renowned not only as a great Torah scholar, but also as a righteous individual, a holy individual who had the power to give blessings. He was a miracle worker. No thanks, replied Avigdor. Now, you have to understand, this no thanks was not coming out of, oh, I'm good, thank you. It's rather coming out of a place of arrogance. He was good. I don't need anybody's help. I am very wealthy. I own many properties. I have servants, plenty of delicacies, everything else I want. I have more than I need. So the Baal Shem Tov replied, you're very fortunate. Perhaps you would like a blessing for your family. He says, nope. I have a large and healthy family of which I am very proud. They are a credit to me. I don't need or want anything. 1 second. I don't need or want anything. So the Baal Shem Tov replied, well, then perhaps you can help me. May I request one thing from you? Can you please deliver a letter to the head of the charity committee in Brody? Certainly, replied Avigdor. I live in Brody, actually, and I'll be happy to assist you in this matter. The Baal Shem Tov took out a pen and paper, wrote a letter, sealed it in an envelope, and gave it to Avigdor. Avigdor took the letter, placed it in his jacket pocket, and returned home. But he had so many projects on his mind. He was so busy. He was such a very big, fancy schmancy man that by the time he arrived back home in Brody, he had completely forgotten about the entire encounter with the Baal Shem Tov. So some time passed. About 16 years. Oops. And the wheel of fortune suddenly turned. All of Avigdor's assets and properties were lost or destroyed. Floods ruined his field of crops. Fires destroyed his forests. Calamity after calamity, he was left penniless. Creditors took his house and everything he owned. He was forced to sell even his clothing to feed his children. One day, while cleaning out the pockets of an old jacket he planned to sell, he found a letter. A letter that he had received from the Baal Shem Tov 16 years earlier. In a flash, he recalled his visit and his arrogance when he thought he had everything. With tears in his eyes, he rushed to finally fulfill his mission and deliver the letter. He felt like maybe I can still deliver to the guy in charge of the committee. So the envelope was addressed to a Mr. Tzadok, chairman of the charity committee of Brody. He ran into the street and encountered one of his friends. Grabbing his arm, he said, "Where can I find Mr. Tzadok?" He said, "Mr. Tzadok?" He said, "Mr. Tzadok." He's like, "Head of the charity committee?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, he's in the synagogue. I was just there a few minutes ago. In fact, Mr. Tzadok is a very lucky man indeed. Just today, he was appointed the head of the charity committee." He says, "Tell me more about this, Mr. Tzadok." So willing to oblige, Avigdor's friend continued. Mr. Tzadok was born and raised here in Brody, a tailor by profession. He was always down on his luck, never able to make a decent living. He was hardly ever able to support his family, and they always lived in abject poverty. He sat in the back of the synagogue, and no one ever took notice of him. Despite working many hours, he never earned much. It was hard for him to scrape together enough money for even a loaf of bread for his family. Recently, however, the tide changed. Mr. Tzadok was introduced to a local nobleman, and he made uniforms for all his servants. The nobleman was very satisfied with Mr. Tzadok's craftsmanship, and his business started to pick up. He even received an order for 5,000 uniforms for the army. He became a wealthy man and gained respect in the eyes of the community. He did not forget his former poverty, though, and gave generously to many, taking an active role in the communal affairs. Just this morning, he was unanimously elected chairman of the charity committee. Hearing the story, Avigdor hurried to the synagogue and found Mr. Tzadok busy perusing the many requests for financial assistance. He handed Mr. Tzadok the letter, and together they read the words of the Baal Shem Tov, which were penned 16 years earlier. Dear Mr. Tzadok, the man who brought this letter is named Avigdor. He was once a very wealthy man, but is now very poor. He has paid for his arrogance. Since just this morning you were elected chairman of the charity committee, I request that you do all you can to assist him, as he has a large family to support. He will once again become successful, and this time he will be more suited to success. In case you doubt my words, I will give you the following sign. Your wife is expecting a baby, and today she will give birth to a baby boy. They had hardly concluded the reading of the letter when someone burst into the synagogue and exclaimed, Mazel Tov, Mr. Tzadok, your wife just gave birth to a baby boy. Thanks to the Baal Shem Tov's foresight, Avigdor once again became very wealthy, and this time he remained humble and was admired by all. Questions, comments, jokes. Nobody gets jokes. That's my favorite story. One of my favorite stories. Good. Well, he was a holy man. You want an actual explanation? So prophecy was something that the Jewish people has always had. Since the time of Moses, we've had prophets, just left and right. In fact, there was a time there were thousands of prophets, the times of the temple. The Talmud tells us at a certain point that prophecy went away. But it's very clear in many other sources that when it says that prophecy went away, it doesn't mean it goes away completely. It just means that as a general thing, for there be just thousands of prophets, that that access to prophecy is not available anymore. But there are individuals that have an aspect of prophecy. So we see about the Baal Shem Tov that he had a certain level of prophecy. He was able to see things. The Chabad Rebbe is right that Baal Shem Tov was able to see from one side of the world to the other. He was able to. He knew what was going on, and this wasn't like this happened on a daily basis. Those who were hanging around the Baal Shem Tov, at a certain point, they were in awe, they were surprised, they were shocked, they were elated by what they were seeing, but they got kind of used to it. Okay. But if you want like an exact answer, I'm not the Baal Shem Tov, I wouldn't know. I think you had a question earlier.
You answered. I was just
Oh, okay.
quickly talk about biblical prayer and biblical prayer. I was wondering if this is just different or if it refers to a hierarchical level of prayer. The answer that there's a depth to biblical prayer or richness to it or a different form of it.
So it's an interesting topic. We have an obligation and a responsibility and a privilege to listen to the commandments of the Torah. Like God tells us do this and this, put on tefillin, like the whatever, keep Shabbos and whatever. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is to listen to the judges and the sages, the Jewish people, the leaders of the Jewish people, that when they enact something, when they make a decision on Jewish law, which is not black and white, we have an obligation to listen to them and to follow what they say. So you have these sages, they have this power at their hands, right? They could do whatever they want. They can control the people, right? That's what it sounds like, at least. So if you're expecting these sages to have all this control, the God-given power to just control the people, tell them do whatever you want, shine my shoes, make me dinner, right? What did they enact? How did they take control? I'll tell you how they took control. They instituted the lighting of Hanukkah candles. They instituted the lighting of Shabbos candles. They instituted washing your hands before bread. It seem very interesting things to do if you have all this power at your hand, because it's not a power thing. They instituted these things because there was a need for them, a Torah-based need. Based on the spirit and the principles of Torah that Torah teaches, they understood that there's a need to implement these ideas, implement these commandments. And it's also a two-way street. If the sages institute something and the people don't accept it, then it's not a thing. A very famous example, the Purim story. So we have Purim, we have different mitzvahs that we do, reading the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, which is one of the rabbinical institutions. We have a meal, we give gifts to the poor, we give gifts of food to each other. And the Talmud tells us that Mordechai, one of the main guys in the Purim story, the leader of the Jewish people, he wanted to make Purim a serious holiday. It's a holiday, but he wanted to make it like Shabbos. Like there's things you can't do on Shabbos. You can't drive a car. You can't turn on lights. You can't light a fire. He wanted Purim to be like such a day. And the Jewish people did not accept it. That's why today we don't do that. We have Purim the way it is with the other things, but not like that, not in that form. Mordechai wanted it, but we didn't accept it. So it's almost like a two-way street. So nobody's coercing us to do anything. If they instituted something, there's really good reason for doing so, and our ancestors accepted it upon themselves and us as well. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I will wish everybody a good Shabbos. Today's Friday. I lost my mouse again. Oh, it's off. Huh. It's a wireless thing. Okay, there we go. Okay. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you some other time.